The contract landed on Damien Cross's mahogany desk with a soft thud that might as well have been a gunshot. Elena Martinez stood across from him, her shoulders squared, her dark eyes blazing with something that looked like fury but tasted like desperation. "I need you to marry me," she said, her voice steady even as her fingers trembled against the leather portfolio she clutched. "For 6 months. No questions asked." Damien's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. In 12 years of running Cross Enterprises, he'd fielded hostile takeover attempts, media scandals, and boardroom coups. Not once had he been rendered speechless. He studied the woman before him, the same paralegal who'd worked on his legal team for 3 years, always competent, always invisible. Except she wasn't invisible now. She was incandescent with barely controlled panic, and something about the set of her jaw told him she'd already exhausted every other option before walking into his office at 7 in the morning. "Explain," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet his competitors knew to fear. Elena's throat worked as she swallowed. She thought of Sophia's hospital bills stacked on her kitchen counter, each one a countdown to a future she couldn't provide. She thought of the immigration lawyer's apologetic smile as he'd explained that her sister's student visa had been denied, that the only path forward was family sponsorship, and that single guardians were scrutinized far more harshly than married couples. She thought of Sophia's face when she'd promised her little sister that everything would be okay, that they'd find a way. "My sister is 16. She's brilliant, full scholarship to MIT next year, but immigration won't extend her visa. She needs a stable family situation, and they've made it clear that a single 28-year-old paralegal doesn't qualify. But a married couple with financial stability?" She pushed the contract closer. "That qualifies." The pieces clicked into place with brutal efficiency. Damien should have felt manipulated. Instead, he felt something uncomfortably close to respect. She wasn't asking him to save her. She was offering him a transaction, her spine straight despite the fact that she was clearly terrified. "And what do I get out of this arrangement?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse jump visibly in her throat. "Your grandmother's trust," Elena said, and had the satisfaction of seeing shock crack through his composed mask. She'd done her research during the sleepless nights, had found the carefully buried clause in the Cross family trust documents. "You need to be married by your 35th birthday next month, or the controlling shares transfer to your cousin Marcus, the one currently under investigation for embezzlement." Damien's jaw tightened. His grandmother's final act of control from beyond the grave, her way of forcing him toward the conventional life she'd always wanted for him. He'd planned to fight it in court, but legal battles took time he didn't have. "You've been thorough. I'm good at my job," she said quietly. Pride, he thought. Even now, even asking for this impossible thing, she had her pride. It did something strange to his chest. He stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace, and Elena fought the urge to step back. She'd seen Damien Cross from a distance for years, the sharp suits, the sharper mind, the way people scattered when he walked through the halls. Up close, he was overwhelming. 6'3" of controlled power, dark hair slightly too long, gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her careful composure to the terror beneath. 6 months, he said, his voice low. "We maintain separate bedrooms. No physical relationship. We present as a devoted couple in public, and when the time is up, we divorce quietly. I'll ensure your sister's situation is resolved, and I'll pay off her college tuition in full." The offer was more generous than Elena had dared hope, but she forced herself not to show relief. Not yet. "I want it in writing, every term. And I want a clause that if either of us breaks the no physical contact rule, the other can walk away immediately with all agreements still honored." Something flickered in Damien's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or challenge. She was setting boundaries, protecting herself from him. Smart, infuriating, intoxicating. "Agreed," he said, and extended his hand. Elena's palm met his, and the shock of contact sent electricity racing up her arm. His hand was warm, strong, and held hers a beat too long. She told herself it meant nothing, that the sudden heat in her stomach was just anxiety. But when she pulled away, she saw the same awareness in his eyes, quickly shuddered. "We'll need to make this convincing," Damien said, his voice rougher than before. "Starting with moving your things into my penthouse this weekend." Elena nodded, her heart hammering. 6 months. She could survive anything for 6 months. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the kitchen of Damien's penthouse at midnight, trying to remember how to breathe. The immigration interview had gone well. Too well. The officer's questions had been pointed, designed to catch inconsistencies, and they'd navigated them like a real couple. Because Damien had prepared. He'd memorized her coffee order, her sister's birthday, the name of her childhood dog. He'd reached for her hand with practiced ease, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a way that had seemed so genuine, she'd almost forgotten it was performance. Almost. "You're thinking too loud." Damien's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him in the doorway, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He'd discarded the armor of his suit jacket, and the sight of him like this, rumpled, human, did dangerous things to her resolve. "I'm not thinking anything," she lied, gripping her mug tighter. He moved into the kitchen with that quiet confidence that seemed hardwired into him, reaching past her for a glass. The movement brought him close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and cedar-scented that made her dizzy. "You did well today," he said softly. "Sophia will get her visa." Relief crashed through her, so intense her knees weakened. "Thank you," she whispered. And before she could stop herself, before she could remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea, she turned and wrapped her arms around him. Damien went rigid. They'd maintained careful distance for weeks, their only touches the choreographed hand-holding and brief shoulder contact required for their public facade. This was different. This was Elena's face pressed against his chest, her body soft and warm against his, her hair smelling like jasmine and desperation and gratitude. His hands hovered at his sides for a heartbeat before betraying him, settling on her back, pulling her closer. She fit against him perfectly. The thought slammed into him with uncomfortable force. She was small and fierce and trembling, and every protective instinct he'd spent years suppressing roared to life. He wanted to promise her things he had no business promising. He wanted to keep her safe. He wanted... Elena pulled back abruptly, her eyes wide with horror. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... That was inappropriate." "Elena." His voice came out strangled. His hands were still on her waist, and he couldn't seem to make them move. She was looking up at him, her lips parted, and he could see the exact moment she registered the heat in his gaze. Could see her breath catch, her pupils dilate. The air between them crackled with electricity. Elena's gaze dropped to his mouth, and she watched his lips part slightly, saw him lean down incrementally. This was wrong. This violated every term of their agreement. This was exactly what she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. She closed the distance. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question neither of them should have been asking. Then Damien made a sound low in his throat and hauled her closer, and the kiss turned desperate. His hand slid into her hair, angling her head, deepening the kiss until Elena forgot why this was forbidden. She only knew the taste of him, the solid warmth of his body, the way his other hand splayed possessively across her lower back. Damien had kissed women before. Beautiful women, sophisticated women, women who knew the score. But nothing had ever felt like Elena Martinez coming apart in his arms, making these small, breathless sounds against his mouth that made him want to lift her onto the counter and find out what other sounds he could coax from her. The thought shocked him back to reality. He broke the kiss, stepping back so quickly Elena swayed. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, and Damien watched her expression shift from dazed to mortified. "That can't happen again," she said, her voice shaking. "The contract." For a heartbeat, panic clawed at her. That one reckless kiss had technically triggered the clause she'd insisted on. Either of them could walk away now and the deal would still stand. She clung to the fragile hope that if neither of them invoked it, the contract and everything it meant for Sophia could survive. "I know." He dragged a hand through his hair, furious with himself. "I know. It was a mistake." The word landed between them like a slap, and Elena flinched. A mistake? Of course it was. She was the temporary wife, the business arrangement, nothing more. "I'm going to bed," she said stiffly, and walked past him without meeting his eyes. Damien stood alone in the kitchen, the taste of her still on his lips, and wondered how the hell he was going to survive 5 more months. The text came at 2 in the morning. "Can't sleep? Balcony?" Elena stared at her phone, knowing she should ignore it. 2 weeks had passed since the kitchen incident. 2 weeks of painful politeness and careful distance. They'd perfected the art of coexisting without touching, without looking at each other too long, without acknowledging the tension that thickened the air whenever they were alone. But sleep eluded her, and the penthouse felt too empty. And before she could talk herself out of it, she was padding out to the balcony in her pajamas. Damien stood at the railing, looking out over the glittering city. He'd shed his usual armor entirely. Barefoot, wearing only pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked younger like this, vulnerable. "Couldn't turn your brain off?" she asked softly, joining him at the railing but maintaining careful distance. "It's a chronic condition," he said with a ghost of a smile. "You?" "Sophia called. She's nervous about starting at MIT in the fall." Elena wrapped her arms around herself against the cool night air. "She kept thanking me, like I'm some kind of hero instead of someone who dragged a stranger into a fake marriage to fix my problems." "You're keeping your family together," Damien said quietly. "That's not nothing." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "You don't talk about your family much, besides your grandmother and Marcus." His jaw tightened. "There's not much to tell. My parents died when I was 10. Car accident. My grandmother raised me, but she was more interested in molding an heir than raising a child. I learned early that weakness was unacceptable, that emotion was a liability." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She got her wish. I built an empire. I just forgot how to be human somewhere along the way." Elena's heart cracked. She'd seen Damien as untouchable, invincible. But here in the darkness, he was just a man carrying the weight of a lonely childhood and impossible expectations. "You're human," she said softly. "You're helping me save my sister. That's about as human as it gets." He turned to look at her then, and the vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. "I'm not helping you out of altruism, Elena. I needed the marriage for the trust. This is still a transaction." "Is it?" The question hung between them. Because if it was just business, why did he text her at 2 in the morning? Why did he look at her like she was something precious? Why did she feel like she was drowning every time he was near? "It has to be," Damien said. But he was moving closer, drawn by a force neither of them could name. "The contract—" "To hell with the contract," Elena whispered. And then his mouth was on hers. This kiss was different from the first, slower, deeper, achingly tender. Damien's hands cupped her face like she was made of glass, and Elena rose on her toes, her fingers sliding into his hair, trying to get closer, closer, never close enough. He tasted like mint and midnight and possibility, and when he pulled her against him, she felt his heart hammering against hers. Elena, he breathed against her lips, and the way he said her name, like a prayer, like a confession, made her tremble. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't be your temporary anything, Damien. When this ends, it's going to destroy me. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and terrifying. Damien's thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. Then let's not let it end. But reality crashed back in with the morning light, and with it came the reminder that their worlds were impossibly different. Elena returned to her separate bedroom, and they returned to their careful dance of avoidance. Until the following Tuesday, when Elena returned to the penthouse to find Damien waiting with an expression she couldn't read. I need to show you something, he said, and drove her across the city to a building she didn't recognize. The art studio took up the entire third floor, windows flooding the space with golden afternoon light. Canvases lined the walls, some blank, some half-finished, all waiting. Elena turned in a slow circle, her heart in her throat. You mentioned once that you wanted to paint, Damien said quietly. That you'd given it up after your parents died because you needed to work, to take care of Sophia. I thought... He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that was becoming endearingly familiar. I thought maybe you deserved to have that dream back. Elena's eyes burned. The studio was perfect. Everything she'd imagined during those long nights when she'd allowed herself to dream. But more than that, it represented something bigger. You were listening, she whispered. That conversation was months ago, before we even... I always listened to you, Damien said, and the simple honesty in his voice broke something open in her chest. She crossed to him, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. Why are you doing this? His hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. Because you deserve someone who sees you, really sees you. And I... He stopped, swallowing hard. I see you, Elena. I see how strong you are, how much you sacrifice for the people you love. I see how you light up when you talk about color theory, and how you take your coffee with too much sugar, and how you're terrified of failure, but you do brave things anyway. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I see you, and I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect. Elena felt tears spill down her cheeks. Damien, you don't have to say it back, he said quickly. I know this complicates everything, but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that this stopped being fake for me weeks ago. Elena's heart was too full for words, so she kissed him instead, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, she whispered, I love you too. God help me. I'm completely in love with you. The joy that blazed across his face made her want to paint him like this. Unguarded, radiant, absolutely beautiful. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hand sliding into her hair. Stay with me, he murmured against her mouth. Not because of the contract, because you want to. Yes, Elena breathed, and felt the last of her walls crumble. But happiness, she'd learned, was always temporary. The call came 3 days later. Marcus had found out about the marriage clause, about the arrangement. Worse, he'd hired a private investigator who'd uncovered the initial contract, the terms, everything. He was threatening to take it to the board, to expose the marriage as a fraud, to challenge the trust transfer. "You need to end this," Elena said, standing in Damien's study while he paced like a caged animal. "Let me go. Tell them it was my idea, that I manipulated you. You can still fight for the company." "Absolutely not," Damien said flatly. "We'll fight this together. My lawyers, your lawyers can't fix this." Elena's voice broke. "Don't you understand? Marcus has everything. The contract, the timeline, all of it. The board will see you as someone who lied, who manipulated the trust. Your reputation will be destroyed." "I don't care about my reputation," Damien said, crossing to her and gripping her shoulders. "I care about you. We'll find another way." But Elena had already made her decision. She'd spent her whole life fighting, sacrificing, doing whatever it took to protect the people she loved. And she loved Damien Cross with a ferocity that terrified her, which meant she had to let him go. "There is no other way," she said softly, stepping back from his touch. This was always temporary. We both knew that. She watched something die in his eyes. "Elena, please. Sophia got her visa. You got the trust shares. We both got what we needed." Each word felt like swallowing glass. "It's time to end this before we make it worse." "Make it worse?" Damien's voice was raw. "I'm in love with you. How could that possibly make anything worse?" "Because loving me is going to cost you everything you've built," Elena said, and her voice finally broke. "I won't let you sacrifice your life's work for a relationship that started as a lie." She'd spent her entire adult life trading her own wants for other people's safety, her art for rent, sleep for extra shifts, joy for Sophia's future. Trading herself away for the people she loved was the only language she truly knew. Loving Damien just meant learning how to make the biggest trade of all. "It stopped being a lie," Damien said desperately. "Elena, please, we can figure this out. Don't do this." But Elena was already walking toward the door, her vision blurred with tears, her heart shattering with every step. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She left before he could see her fall apart. Left before she could change her mind. Left before she could be selfish enough to let him lose everything for her. Elena lasted 4 days in the apartment she'd rented across town before Damien found her. She opened the door at midnight to find him standing there, looking like he hadn't slept since she left. His tie was gone, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes held a devastation that mirrored her own. "Let me in," he said quietly. "Please." She should have said no. Instead, she stepped aside. Damien walked into the tiny studio apartment, taking in the half-packed boxes, the bare walls, the evidence of a life being dismantled. When he turned back to her, his expression was raw with pain. "I fired Marcus," he said. Handed the evidence of his embezzlement to the board along with my resignation as CEO. Elena's heart stopped. "What?" "Damien, no, I'm done," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. "I'm done building empires that mean nothing. I'm done sacrificing everything that matters for a legacy my grandmother wanted, and I never did. I'm done pretending I can live without you." "But the company," Elena's voice broke. "That's your whole life." "No," Damien said, crossing to her and taking her hands in his. "You're my life. These past 4 days without you have been hell. I don't want the company if it means losing you. I don't want any of it." Elena was crying now, ugly tears that she couldn't control. "You can't throw everything away for me. I won't let you." "Elena!" He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're not taking anything from me. You're giving me everything. A reason to live instead of just exist. A future that actually means something. I love you." not the carefully controlled, appropriate version of myself that I show the world. You make me want to be messy and human and real. I love you too, Elena sobbed. God, I love you so much it terrifies me. Then be terrified with me, Damien said, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees buckle. When he pulled back, he was smiling, a real smile, unguarded and beautiful. I talked to my lawyers. We're fighting Marcus's claims, but even if we lose, I don't care. I'll build something new, something that's actually mine, not my grandmother's legacy. And I want you beside me while I do it. Are you sure? Elena whispered. Really sure? I've never been more sure of anything, Damien said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This isn't about the contract or the trust or any of that. This is about you and me. Elena Martinez, will you marry me? For real this time. Forever. The ring was perfect. A simple sapphire that reminded her of midnight on the balcony, of whispered confessions and stolen kisses. Elena looked at the man before her, this powerful, brilliant man who'd given up everything for her, and felt her world shift into place. Yes, she breathed. Yes, yes, yes. Damien slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her with a reverence that made her feel like something sacred. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you didn't make a mistake, he murmured against her lips. You already have, Elena whispered. And then she was pulling him down to her, hands fumbling with the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel skin against skin, to erase the distance that had nearly destroyed them both. Damien lifted her easily, carrying her to the small bed in the corner, laying her down with a gentleness that contrasted beautifully with the hunger in his eyes. I love you, he said, settling over her, his weight perfect and right. I love your strength, your fierce heart, the way you fight for the people you love. I love every part of you. Elena pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like salt and promises, her hands sliding into his hair, holding him close. Show me, she whispered. Show me how much. And he did. He loved her with a tenderness that made her feel worshipped, every kiss and every touch a quiet vow. In his arms, Elena had never felt so cherished, so completely seen and wanted. When they finally surrendered to what had always been between them, it felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Damien's arms wrapped around her like he'd never let go. Elena traced idle patterns on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her palm. What happens now? She asked softly. Now? Damien pressed a kiss to her hair. Now I take you back to the penthouse. We plan a real wedding, the kind where our vows actually mean something. Sophia moves into the guest room if she wants, and I get to watch her big sister walk her to class at MIT in the fall. He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes soft. You paint in that studio every day. I figure out what I actually want to build instead of what I'm supposed to. And we figure out this whole marriage thing together as partners. Partners, Elena repeated and smiled. I like the sound of that. Good, Damien murmured, pulling her closer. Because you're stuck with me now. No more running, no more sacrificing yourself for my benefit. We're in this together, whatever comes. Elena tilted her face up for a kiss. Together, she agreed, and felt the last piece of her broken heart slide back into place. 6 months later, Elena stood in her studio, paint splattered and exhausted and deliriously happy. The canvas before her was nearly complete, a portrait of Damien standing on the balcony, looking out over the city with an expression of quiet contentment she'd never seen in those early days. You captured my good side, Damien said from the doorway. and she turned to find him watching her with that soft look that still made her heart flip. "You don't have a bad side," she said, setting down her brush and crossing to him. He caught her around the waist, pulling her close despite the paint on her clothes. "Sophia got accepted into the advanced robotics program," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "She called while you were painting. She wants to know if we'll come to the presentation next month." "Of course," Elena said immediately. "We wouldn't miss it." The words still sent warmth flooding through her. They were a we now, a real partnership built on love and trust and mutual sacrifice. Damien had started a new venture capital firm, focusing on investing in companies founded by women and minorities, using his business acumen for something that actually mattered. Cross Enterprises, bruised by the scandal, had found its footing under a new CEO and a chastened board. Damien watched from a distance, relieved to finally be free of it. She painted during the days and helped with strategy in the evenings, and together, they'd built something beautiful. "What are you thinking?" Damien asked, tucking a paint-streaked strand of hair behind her ear. Elena looked up at the man, who'd started as a convenient solution to her problems and become the love of her life. "I'm thinking about how we started," she said softly. "A fake marriage to solve our separate crises. And somehow it became the most real thing in my life." "Mine too," Damien murmured, and kissed her with a tenderness that still stole her breath. "Best transaction I ever made." Elena laughed against his mouth. "You're supposed to say it's not a transaction anymore." "It's not," Damien said seriously, pulling back to meet her eyes. "It's a love story. The messy, imperfect, absolutely perfect kind. The kind where we both win." "We both win," Elena repeated, and kissed him again, tasting forever in the space between heartbeats. And as the golden afternoon light spilled through the studio windows, illuminating the life they'd built from a desperate gamble, she knew with absolute certainty that some contracts were meant to be broken so they could be rewritten into something infinitely better. Together.